a reading by Truman Capote. Just kidding. Okay, here we go. We'll see how you like this. The total land area of the Japanese home islands of Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu is smaller than the American state of Montana. Three-quarters of that area is occupied by densely wooded mountains that are too steep and landslide prone for large-scale settlement or agriculture. Japan's population, which was some 80 million people in 1945, the rice fields to feed that population, and the institutions to keep it literate, orderly, and happy are all crammed into what's left, a total area about the size of Indiana. This densely populated land is concentrated in intermittent pockets and stretches along the Pacific coast. These are generally clustered around the mouths of fast-moving rivers, rushing down from catchment areas and headwaters in the country's mountainous interior. As the long arm of Honshu bends westward to reach the northern tip of Kyushu, however, these scarce spots of level land become even scarcer as mountains and cliffs coming right up to the water's edge become more frequent. One such spot, which for most of its geological and inhabited history was a 7-kilometer wide stretch of bay shore with a wall of steep hills at its back, came very close, ending up another typical waterfront settlement on the inland sea, perhaps not much more than an oyster farming village with a few skinny citrus orchards hacked into the cliffs. But this arc of rocky beach also had a slow-flowing, silty river emptying into it. And the story of that river and an alluvial anomaly it experienced about 700 years ago is the story of how a craggy backwater in the samurai fiefdom of Aki eventually became one of the most important harbors and transportation hubs in western Japan. Sometime around the year 1400, possibly resulting from a combination of natural geological factors and human agricultural activity further upstream, something in the mouth of this otherwise not particularly large nor noteworthy river began catching silt. Within a matter of only a few years, the nutrient-rich soil that gave the river its name of Otagawa had accumulated into a wide tributary threaded delta of reed marshes and islet bars. Otagawa means river of the fat fields or the fertile fields. Eventually, 6 tributary streams had branched off of the Oda River, carving the ever-growing delta up into 5 long and roughly parallel fingers of land that now extended the original shoreline several kilometers out into the bay. Land reclamation on the cheap. In a space-starved rice-growing culture, a large new patch of level, fertile land was not going to be left to lay fallow for long, and the Oda Delta was no exception. Enterprising peasants began moving in of their own volition and setting up rice paddies, gradually clustering into settlements collectively referred to by the late 16th century as Gokason, or the 5 villages. Before the great 17th century clampdown on governance at all levels of society that arrived with the Edo period, and in many ways has never really ended in Japan, the residents of remote localities such as Gokason still tended to be largely left up to their own devices by their local feudal lords, generally a hereditary samurai clan. The only significant contact the local peasants would have with the authorities would be when a tax collector from the clan would appear once a year to collect a tribute of rice or other agricultural product, assessed according to the size of the hamlet and the yield of its annual harvests. Aside from this, the peasants were pretty much free to do whatever they wanted as long as they kept kicking their rice tributes up on schedule and in full. For Gokasson, the local landlord was the Mori samurai clan. But the Mori's activity was concentrated in their family's mountain stronghold of Takata, which was nearly 30 kilometers inland. And with the Japanese archipelago in constant convulsions from seemingly endless clashes between rival samurai warlords, the Moris had more important things to worry about than the goings-on of a handful of peasants' hamlets and a far-off stretch of forlorn beachfront. This meant that the residents of Gokasson were free to continue their multi-generational terraforming project unmolested. Lending their hand to nature's ongoing work, they shored up the Oda's constant contributions of new silt into dikes and embankments, year after year, one basketful of earth at a time, reclaiming more and more of the reedy marshes for rice paddies and fish farming pools, and extending the shoreline ever farther out into the bay. When the Mori clan and the rest of the warlords of the Japanese archipelago found peace at last under the political unification of samurai generalissimo and former Mori foe Toyotomi Hideyoshi, it would spell the end of Gokasson's idyll of semi-autonomous self-governance. Having chosen their side wisely in the latest round of the civil war that led to Toyotomi's rise and triumph, the Moris now found themselves in the good graces of the new shogun, who was the de facto ruler in the name of the Emperor of Japan. As a reward for military services rendered, their feudal domain was extended, and the Moris, now flush with rice, cash, and influence, were suddenly in need of a new center of clan operations with better access to land and sea lines of communication than their old Takata stronghold could offer. In the late 1580s, the eye of the clan's daimyo leader, Mori Terumoto, fell on the Ota Delta as a place where he might build a new castle headquarters. The delta offered excellent access to the sea, obviously, and the local stretch of a well-trafficked regional road through Mori territory could easily be rerouted to run through the new site, an arrangement that would ease the government's tasks of controlling and monitoring its traffic and collecting duties and tolls on same. Moreover, the spot's topography of long, thin islets and tributaries formed a natural, multi-layered moat defense in depth against potential attackers, a contingency that was never far from the mind of any 16th century samurai warlord. And last but not least, the land would not have to be wrested from someone else's control because the Moris already owned it. It was perfect. The daimyo's surveyors laid out a plot for the new castle almost precisely at the geographical center of the delta, and in 1589, ground was broken on the project. The design and construction of the castle followed the samurai norms of the era. At the center of its layout was a central keep surrounded by a square moat, and built on an elevated earthen table, walled in with large boulders and ringed with wooden ramparts. The most prominent feature of the keep was a 37-meter-tall ten-shukaku donjon of wood, plaster, and elegantly gabled metallic gray roof tiles, whose image would someday grace 1 million tourist postcards and dominate the skyline of the area for the next 3.5 centuries. At the opening ceremony, marking the occasion of the daimyo and his entourage moving in to set up shop, Lord Mori announced the new name, both of his new castle and the delta at whose center it sat. The name, which was inspired by the resemblance of the delta's tributary ribboned topography to a wide archipelago of islands, was Hiroshima. Hope you liked that.